So I took a minute to really dive into these raids. Yes, I could have played one day and dropped a video on day two, and maybe that would have gotten more clicks and would have circulated a bit more, but I really wanted to give the benefit of the doubt to Ubisoft, even though they don't deserve it. But I really wanted to play this raid. I really wanted to get through it. It took me 3 weeks to beat the entire thing. In week one, I beat the second boss. In week two, I beat the first, the second, and the third boss. And this week, I was able to beat the last boss and get through the entire thing. It took a lot of time just finding people with mics who are competent. Even the competency didn't even matter. It just took having 4 people with mics really to get through it. And in week one, it took me a few tries to really find someone with a mic, friend them, go through things, fail, people with no mics, realize that it was basically impossible to do it with people with no mics and not being able to communicate with each other. But as far as what I've seen in the raid, this is funny. Back in OTT 1, when they had exploration mode rather than guided mode as the default, they basically knew what they were doing back then, because that's what they've basically done here for the raid. You come upon this island and you get your intel, and the intel base, it gives you a hint where you need to go. And it's very simple, it's straightforward, it's not difficult. And you look at your intel, you find where you need to go, you go there, you get more intel, it takes you to the next place. This is how the entire game should have been designed. And I mean that as, I got something in my eye. I mean that not developing something that just gets overridden by the next thing you develop for people who don't want to have a hard time playing the game. What I mean by that is, for instance, you make this exploration mode, you put all this intel in the game, right? And then you completely destroy all that development time by implementing guided mode. This is something I realized a lot in this game that Ubisoft did. It even goes into the healing system. You did all these animations, getting shot, walking, hurt, bandaging yourself up, syringing yourself up, and then you completely erased all of that all those mechanics are basically erased by a simple syringe or an auto healing system, or just not even making the game difficult enough for that to even happen in game. I realized playing a lot, I hardly even go through the injury system, and I realized they've done that a lot in this game. And that's one thing that they implemented in the raids that I think is good. They don't give you the choice of exploration or guided. It's, hey, you're getting this intel, this is how it is, figure it out, figure out where to go. And I think that was a great thing. I think the raid island itself is well designed. I really, even though excluding the criticism of the fact that it makes no sense, this literally makes no sense, whether it's the story, the setting, none of this makes sense. Being on a volcanic island, you go through the raid, it feels like Ghost Recon, the rest of the entire raid, until you get up to the boss, and then all of a sudden you're fighting this huge RoboCop thing, and none of the mechanics are explained to you. Usually in video games, at least good video games, developers will explain mechanics to you, so when you get to a certain point, it might be difficult to figure out, but you've seen or understand how these mechanics might work. These developers are so all over the place that you realize I don't even think they know what the hell they're trying to design. I think they're just doing what the engine allows them to do, or what might be the easiest for them to do, as far as rinse, wash, repeat. Because every boss, maybe except the computer boss, where the poison comes out, and then you gotta shoot all 3 computers. Every boss just has a little box that you hit, and that does the damage. I mean, and then they have maybe a mechanic or two. It's very mundane. There's no explanation ever. There's nothing leading up to that to explain what these things are, how they came to be. It's something I think of maybe to give you guys a good idea of where I'm coming from. If you played any Zelda game, but more specifically, what really resonates with me is Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda, back in I think '97 on the Nintendo 64. When you went into a dungeon, you found a new item, and that item was used to kill the boss. And throughout that dungeon, you kind of learned how to use that item, and the item was used in a certain way that gave you an idea of how it could be used on that boss. So I really feel like in this situation with Ghost Recon, if you're gonna go down this path, you have it needs to be story driven. Like, we went through the entire story, and it was mundane in my opinion, and nothing was explained about these RoboCop bosses. Unless you guys let me know, maybe it's on inside missions or something, and maybe I missed it. I haven't 100% completed the game, but as far as the Golem Island and these machines and what's going on with them and how they're being developed, it's just right over my head. It's kind of like they just plopped it down and said, here, go do this. Being thrown onto the island, I felt like I didn't quite understand the story arc behind it. I did beat the game, at least the story part of the game, and I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments, did I miss something here, or was this thing just like put together like a Frankenstein just dropped on us? As far as the raid island itself, with each area, I have to be honest, I think the designers always do a great job, and I've always said that. The people who design, the art team who design all the stuff, all the doodads and everything that has to do with the art in the world, I think looks really great. It always looks great. The area 3, where it's volcano, and there's that one area where it's like you can't see, it's got like an orangey hue, and I think that area looks really nice. It's so cool. It's so cool how you're walking and there are mines everywhere, but they don't think to implement shit like that in the normal part of the game. Like that, I think that's the type of stuff people want. People want to be walking and they want to fall into a booby trap. They want to, there's a mine here. Maybe there's I've said this in a previous video about how the wolves should have been. They should be more interactive out in the world. You should be walking from one place to another and come upon a trap where there are wolf snipers and there's C4 or mines that blow up if you walk over them and get too close. That felt really good in the raid. It felt good coming upon it for the first time and not realizing what the hell it was. Like, yo, what's that sound? And you got to put on your thermals to see them. That is something that I think people want more of. And I think the raid could have consisted more of mechanics like that, set in like more of a real world. Something about these bosses that I don't understand is that did they design this entire game around the idea that they wanted to introduce this type of gameplay, and the only way for them to do it would be with robots? Because look, you did it with Walker. Walker had a cool little mechanic, if you want to call it cool. It's still, I don't know, I think it leaves you wanting. And I made a raid video, or a video about how I feel raids should be, or mechanics that could be introduced in the raids. And I really feel like the developers are able to do simple things like that, but they won't, and I don't know why. And this is something that I don't think the Ubisoft developers over at Ubisoft Paris have understood or understand yet. When you look at games like Metal Gear Solid, it's based on reality, but it's still science fiction. It's still kind of fantasy-ish, especially with the way that Kojima implements his bosses. But when you have a narrative and you tell a story explaining things, the audience can believe it a little bit more and kind of just accept where you're taking the story. So for instance, with these bosses, my number one gripe, they're not explained. The tech there isn't in the story. Nothing is explained to us. When you look at the old Metal Gear Solid games, like Metal Gear Solid 1, and you look at some of those bosses, the boss fights were ridiculous. It was health bars. There were certain mechanics to them that were different than what we might have seen up until that point. But Kojima explained it in a way where we accepted it. And I feel like the Ubisoft developers could have done the same thing. For instance, with the Walker mission. Let's go back to when we kill Walker. At no point of the story are we being introduced to this type of tech that Walker will have at the end. At no time in this story are we introduced to certain types of tech that explain the raid bosses. And you have to put a human face to some of these things. You miss out on a huge opportunity to establish a bad guy, an antagonist, right? To us being the protagonist, you missed out on opportunities to establish an antagonist, put them in one of these things. For instance, like when you fight Liquid Snake, whether it's at the end, hand to hand, he gets in the Jeep. Earlier on, he's in the airplane, or any point in time when you're fighting a boss in Metal Gear Solid, the bosses are established. There's a story to them. So whether you fight a boss like Liquid or you fight something like Metal Gear, the whole story pushes that narrative. It pushes you into the setting so you kind of accept what's going on. In this game, the developers have completely abandoned explaining what's going on and have just thrown things into the game that make no sense. Therefore, your audience isn't going to believe it. When you're going through the raid and you get this intel, right? Here's intel to take you to that intel. That's all it is. It's basically find this intel. Find intel to beat this. Find intel to beat. There's no story. There's no progression of the narrative. You're dropped on the Gollum Island, and then all of a sudden you fight a few wolves, you fight a few sentinels, you get intel here and there, and then all of a sudden, bam, there's a big thing that drops down a tank that you have to kill, or there's a big big drone that flies and shoots electricity. None of this stuff is explained. We're not involved in the story. So it's basically just something there for us to kill. And other than getting loot, other than it being a loot pinata, your players aren't invested in the story. We don't come away from this with an experience like, wow, that was amazing. We come away from it like, whatever. And that's what this game is. This game is basically, whatever. There's too many chefs in the kitchen, or there's just not enough time to fully flesh out these ideas, but something is truly dysfunctional over at Ubisoft Paris with their design implementations and the philosophy of how they're making this game and how they've created it. Because boy, is it all over the place. And you could look at old games and how even in Metal Gear Solid 5, you can see what happens when a developer doesn't get the time he needs to explain things to his audience. Because even Metal Gear Solid 5, for all the props that we might give Metal Gear 1, 2, Snake Eater, which was amazing, even 4, 5 was lacking. The skulls made no sense, right? It was kind of like almost like the same thing. And that's what we're getting here. We're in an area where the developers weren't given enough time, but I'm wondering, even if they were, would this type of stuff have made sense? I understand Jake Skell, Skull Island, AI, technology, yada, 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 so we're just supposed to believe the narrative, but I think they could have easily had a few more antagonists, or at the very least, instead of us killing, I don't even remember, they're so insignificant, I don't even remember their names, Rosebud and all those guys. Instead of us killing them nonchalantly throughout the game, maybe they could have established a story and they could have been in the driver's seat of these machines and we could have been fighting them. You know, after we take out Walker, they get control of this tech and then we chase them onto this island after Walker's defeated. Maybe they go to the island, they retreat to the island, they get in their tech, we chase them there, and then this is showcased to us. But throughout the whole story that we're playing this game, none of this is in the story. So that's really a big gripe I have right now with the way they're choosing to design this game, and they're choosing to push this story, which really isn't. The Gollum Island raid doesn't really expand the narrative or expand the story or the setting to what Aroa is and what's going on the island. It just basically is there for us to be a loot pinata, and that's how I feel when I went through it once, twice, or these past few weeks. I've gone through it now, and there's just something missing to captivate me as a player into a story that should. I mean, it doesn't really matter anyway. The story was terrible. I don't think anybody really looked at the story going through Ghost Recon and said, oh my god, that was amazing, something like Metal Gear Solid or anything like that. But I think moving forward, Ubisoft has to really look into the writing department and making their games more entertaining from a writing perspective, because then if the gameplay is solid, which it can be, at least we can be more involved and more captivated by what's going on, and there could be a little more emotion behind what we're experiencing rather than just wanting to beat a couple loot pinatas and keep it moving. So I think that's something that is lacking, and something that I had a hard time believing with these raid bosses that are just a bunch of machines that make no sense, and what they did to the characters in the game, not only Walker but his lieutenants, and how everybody was just disregarded and everybody basically became irrelevant. But I think it really just comes down to Ubisoft Paris not having enough time to wrap their heads around what they were building, what they were trying to develop here. So whatever, let me know what you thought of the raid. Let me know what you think of the raid. Have you beaten the raid? Have you gotten through it? If you're on my friends list and you don't have a mic, I don't know, I have a lot of people friend request me, and I don't know if it's from this channel, but there were a few people who invited me to groups, and I joined their group thinking, oh, maybe this is someone who friended me, saw me on YouTube, sent me a friend request. I don't know who you are, but there are a couple people I joined, and I was like, yo, what's up, what's going on? And you didn't have a mic. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but guys, you need to get mics. Your iPhones come with mics. Mics are basically built into everything nowadays. Simple, cheap headphones have a little mic on it. Like, if you're on PC, if you're on anything, you don't have a mic, why? Go get a mic. So anyway, that's it. Let me know what you all think of the raid. Let me know what you think of the bosses. Let me know what you think they could have done better. Let me know if you enjoy it. I don't know. I still think that the raid bosses themselves it still just seems so smashed together, and like, it is what it is. I don't think they really fit this Ghost Recon game at all, obviously. The raid island itself, like I said, has a nice vibe to it, but what are you gonna do? I don't know where this game is going. And yeah, so let me know what you think in the comments. We'll discuss some things. I'm sorry for getting this out so late again. And that is all. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay? All right, guys. Peace.